Dear Davor, it's a great honor for me to have you here on behalf of l'Éducation musicale.
I'm also honored to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
So you're finishing now your PhD at Stanford University. Your supervisor was Brian Ferneyhole, right?
Yes.
Who, when I was a student, he was the controversial figure. Besides the fact that in the new music world, many of us are still great admirers of his
Mhm.
second string quartet and all that. I think what's really important about him, about Brian Ferneyhole, is that for decades he really pointed out the problem of notation.
Mhm.
And people would argue about notation and talk to each other about, is that too difficult? Is that too simple? What is notation? What's the role, the function of notation? And well, what was your experience of working with him? And did you talk about these things? Or
Oh, we talked about many things. I mean, it's like a PhD in the United States lasts for 5 years, and I wasn't even sure when I was applying. I was still hoping that he would be there because there was an announcement that he might retire. So when I got there, I was pretty happy that he was actually assigned as my advisor. And at first, I was really frozen. Also having that same kind of like respect and then after a while you get very friendly. He's an extremely intelligent, fun, and witty guy, and you just start communicating about different things, and you notice that Brian really loves talking about music, about philosophy, and he's really sincerely interested in other person if you're bringing interesting stuff and ideas to the table. And so he usually, when he starts looking at your score, he's looking at it through this eyes of, he once mentioned something of being a copyist when he was a young adult, and so he will approach your score like first looking for if there are some general issues of notation, something that is like that. But he said that helps him kind of get into your piece and understand also the form and stuff. And so once he's kind of gone through that, and he's noticed certain things, he will start pointing out certain details that are and what I find so amazing about him is that, for example, he used to play a lot of wind instruments, and so beyond the kind of a normal experience of just like writing for instruments that generally about how they sound, which registers have different qualities, and how they intermix. He knew like very precise specific about like, oh, these two pitches combined, like they're like one of them is like no keys pressed, the other ones is all keys pressed, and this is going to be like very problematic to have like a quick trill on it. You can like, so he was like very specific about these things. But he was also like what I find the most valuable contribution is how good and quickly he can understand and grasp the idea you're presenting to him, while it's still in this nebulous phase where you're yourself trying to figure out what you want, where he then is able to kind of rephrase it, get the core out of it, and then also kind of give you a way in to this, because I think that's what basically composition and compositional education comes down to, this kind of nitty gritty. Because like we all have amazing ideas, but it's like the transition from the idea to something concrete and the execution that can be either a success or not, right? And I think that people often think that Brian, is just creating a copies, like a mini Fernie House of himself. I've heard that accusation a lot, and it's completely not true. Brian has educated generations and generations of very diverse composers, and I think it's one of his
of course.
particular strong suits is to kind of borrow your brain for a second, understand your perspective, but then add on his perspective to it, and serve you what you need. Like oftentimes he would tell me like, you gotta be clear here, like you don't need all of this like little decorations and ornaments, and like just be like very direct with like stick to that. And I think that he himself very often would never take the remedy he advises you, which is rightfully so, because you're a different person, you have a different aim of your music than he does, and he understands that. So he is really genuinely capable of, helping you on your own terms. And I also have seen the progress throughout these years in the amount of like his suggestions and the type of the suggestions that he was doing in my first years and the ones that he was doing later. It's like whereas like at the beginning it was like more technical and stuff, like over the time it was like more about like really shaping the idea, and I think that that's also something that speaks a lot about him, his capacities as teacher, as on a pedagogical level, that fascinates me about him.
It's clear to me that like he was a teacher of Chernovin, of you already two very different composers. I really can't see, and you both just don't write his kind of music. Maybe there was a time when he had this big position at Darmstadt, right, where probably lots of composers felt like it was a good idea to write like him.
Yeah.
But as a teacher, I don't think that's ever been the case, right?
Yeah, and I'm kind of happy that I'm officially his last student. So.
That's very meaningful. Yeah. Wow, good luck.
Thank you. It's coming soon. I'm graduating in May.
So moving on, maybe it was clear when I was at IRCAM that lots of interesting works were realized with the tools which you mentioned in your thesis, such as mainly Qatar and Mobu. But
actually,
is it only
you suggested to me to try out Qatar when it showed up?
Really?
Yeah.
Wow. So it's only now that AI and machine learning has, so to speak, everywhere that I really understand actually how Qatar and these machines are so, I don't know, visionary. I think that's the word. Yeah. So now that you're, well, from a, let's say Silicon Valley. Silicon Valley perspective, do you see a parallel between a large data set of sounds Qatar is based on and the revolution that seems to be happening now in between? Well, because we always had big data since 20 years, but now we have the ability to interpret big data, right? So what's the creative output of all this? Where have you seen any interesting, I don't know, composer using those kinds of things, or what have you seen disappointing results as well? I'm thinking there must be composers just composing from spreadsheets, and what else? Of course, it's a very trendy topic. Everybody talks about it, and we all hear how to keep men in the loop, how to keep humans in the loop. All that makes sense. I'll shut up now.
It does. I'm just wondering, which part would you want me to base my answer off? Like, do you want me to talk about like the general atmosphere of like how these things are being developed, or do you want me concretely to, because I feel that there's a lot of the things that I sort of disagree with on certain levels. I feel that, for example, there are these companies who are creating. I think that these companies that exist now, especially here in Silicon Valley, they're too big, and what ends up happening is that like it stifles competition, and so much so that, for example, like just think about IRCAM and like something like open music, right? Basically, they have one person employed who's not developing open music or anything, and is just running behind Apple, who keeps publishing new software systems just to keep those softwares up to date. I think like for smaller companies like that pulse that, sorry, this is maybe loud, but that pulse that Apple is dictating is like everybody's like like nobody has that huge manpower to keep up the research on different levels, and those things tend to be very, very commercial, and as such oftentimes very disappointing. I think that notable interesting results that have been recently published, some of them come from Magenta that Google created. So there was something about
I was going to ask you about Magenta, basically. You know,
Yeah.
Doug Eck is in EarCam now.
Oh, really?
No?
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Oh, that's very interesting.
Hmm?
Yeah, so there was this article on DDSP. Yeah, so DDSP stands for Differential Digital Signal Processing, which was kind of what they were able to do is this very interesting AI-supported fusion where you basically are able to supplement one example with a completely different sounding instrument. So you were able like to have a human voice sing a certain melody, and then they were able to put like the violin, but like the synthesized in such a way that the system kind of understands the whole spectral side of it. And yeah, that was published by Jesse Engel. He gave a few talks at Karma that I found very, very interesting. So there are every now and then there are interesting projects. But for example, like there was this one Lyrebird, I think, and I was like, wow. So you read a page and a half or 2 pages of text, you record it, you send it to them, and then they kind of create like a digital version of your voice. So you're basically able to give it then any other text, and it's going to pronounce it with the voice that's stunningly close to your own. So for example, that thing could certainly be very nicely creatively exploited. However, the company never really discloses, like, it's basically you're always very dependent on them. Like, I think that what people forget about AI is that there's a lot of like you said, Qatar is based on on a lot of like big database, and we're talking about that. In order to have, and when we're talking big, we're talking huge, right? So it's like in order to make something like that work, you really need to have like, I don't know, I'm gonna burst a number that's probably incorrect, but like you have to have like 1,000, 10,000 users, right, to have the amount of data where then these statistical algorithmic models in AI that are able to converge and find the solution are actually doing the good thing, doing the good work. So if you don't have a lot of data, you will get some results, but they will not be as refined. And I think that only really big companies are able, and the big companies that are selling commercial products are able to have that extent of data storage and everything and also people. That's what I started to say. That's people forget that there's a lot of human work involved in actually classifying those data. Like if you're using supervised learning or something, like you have to first create a training examples, and that's done by humans, right, in order for the system to be then able to learn and make conclusions for some future example that you bring in, right? So I think that there is a little problem where for any type of project that is not necessarily having a value from a market perspective, it's also slightly unviable or harder to achieve from technological perspective, if you know what I mean.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Yeah. But like going back to Qatar, I definitely think that it's very visionary what they have done. And what was the part of your question? You were asking about something else. I forgot now.
Now I wanted to ask you basically, maybe, well, we're seeing lots of things in the realm of sound, like the example from Magenta you talked about, or I think Deep Minds, they also do like not concatenative synthesis, but neural synthesis,
Yes.
and all this is amazing, but it's still in the realm of audio. And I was gonna talk about Dada because I know you've used it, and this is to me the only example I've seen so far of in the realm of music composition, notation, scores, our realm really.
Absolutely, and I think that's admirable. I know Daniele Gysi well, and he's a great composer and amazing researcher. And I'm always fascinated. I'm like, does his day last 48 hours? Because like I don't know when this guy manages to do all of that. But Dada is definitely, while Bach is a kind of his and Andrea Agostini's baby. Dada is entirely his, and I think it's a very smart way of putting that data abstractly. Like I think that there's generally problem of the way that how you notate certain things, and I think that with Bach and Dada, with all of these what do they call them, the slots, right? So it's nice that the thing has these slots that can be kind of defined as anything. It can be your dynamic curve, it can be the amount of effect you're applying to, it can be, and I think that will translate it into Dada, gives you really this nice way of abstracting away from the musical score, doing a mathematical operation, and then coming back and kind of harnessing on what you've been doing that. I have just started using Dada, so I can't say that much. I'm still like really a beginner user, but I'm currently developing a technique that I call microlage, like a micro collage. And the idea of it is that there would be basically two modes. One is the so-called homogeneous, and the other one is heterogeneous. Whereas heterogeneous is very close to what concatenative synthesis does. You have a huge pool of data, and you're trying to match some kind of model, or the model can be another piece of music, or it can be like just some kind of a multi-dimensional boundaries of like what you want, which kind of rules you want the system to respect, and then it kind of gets you out bits and chips of little snippets from your huge database. However, what I'm more interested in, and I think that Dada does a little bit of that, but with scores, I'm more interested in this homogeneous, what I call homogeneous side of a microlage, which is where you have a little amount of data, and basically you abstract it also in a similar way that Dada does it, and then you're able for your system to do multiple manipulations on that material, and that limited material, and then try to squeeze it into model. Because that way you're kind of, I think that's even more interesting, because working with this, I mean, both are super interesting. I find them both very nice. But I think that a second model, I think that's something that the idea came slightly through the usage of Vecinator. This was done by Rebecca Fieberink, and I think that what she manages with Vecinator, but just in terms of like gesture and all of that, is that you don't need to train your software like with thousands of examples, like, right? You can train it with a few recordings of yourself doing like the same gesture over and over again, like let's say 10 times, and then the computer is going to recognize it. And that's like kind of like what I'm sort of aiming with. Like, I don't want to now have like a huge set of like entire Beethoven's opus in order for the system to be able to work, but I kind of like want to just say like, okay, I really love these three famous phrases, but could we like stretch it, compress it, transpose it, mutilate it to the point where actually this thing or parts of this thing or this thing like kind of looped or whatever can fit into another structure, a little bit like those photo montage pictures and stuff like that, right? Where you're kind of playing with a hue in order to get the full picture. So yeah, I'm curious. I'm really into this, and I just started working on it, and hoping to soon publish like a kind of a theoretical framework for this microlage, and then slowly develop it into some kind of maybe it's going to be a plugin that's going to be connected to Dada or something that then can do these automated searches, and you can kind of get your little pastiche there.
Wow, looking forward. Just with what you just said, to me, it really seems a bit like this concept of organicity, like the German, like say the Beethoven way of
Yeah.
just taking a germ and spread it into
Yep.
something.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
It
is
very
it?
much comes from that.
Do you see that as the opposite of mosaicing, or no? I didn't get your thesis at all, or
No, no, no. I don't view that as opposite. I think it's just one way of thinking of it. I think that this way is just more monochromatic in certain aspects, but for the purpose of getting that perfect color. And I think that also I'm not thinking of creating like entire pieces maybe with like, but you know, like you can create certain sections where you use just that. I think that what I've worked mostly, to be quite frank, in the recent times with Ben Huckbart's audio guide, which is an amazing software. I would recommend it to everyone. The only downside, if there is any, is the fact that he didn't create a GUI, so you're operating everything from the terminal, and it is a little bit of a steep learning curve at the beginning. But once you start operating with that, it can. And another one is that it's like it's not in real time, whereas like Mubu and Qatar can have these also live options. So, however, what I really find great about this is that for the first time with concatenative synthesis, there is a way of having a tool, and I think that Ben Huckbart actually explains that, and I'm crediting him for that in my writing, that most of the electronic music tools are like this huge, vast amount of detailed tools of structuring one sound, right? And in super different ways, sound, and also like the way it like pulsates in time and stuff like that. But there is next to no real instrument or something which would be a shortcut for creating a form. He gives the analogy of like how piano used to be that sort of interface for composers in the 19th century when writing for orchestra. And he said that he hopes that Audio Guide would be that for him. And what he means is that like what Audio Guide helps you with is like you can, like what he does very often, he will scat and record himself like sing, because he has like an idea like okay, and now this is your model, and you have your database filled with like different instruments and stuff, and you give it to concatenative synthesis, and now it kind of follows that gesture, but that whole thing is already a temporally, very clearly structured phrase, right? And I think that's what's nice about concatenative synthesis, that by giving it a model, that model already has a kind of like micro to meso structure existing. I wouldn't know any other tool which enable, like in the end, yes, you create audio for example, yeah, you use audio sculpt, you create like wonderful, like I don't know, some resonant electronic background, okay, but then you still have to decide how long it is, where other things that are happening, like you really have to, with electronic music, decide for every millisecond when one thing is ending, when you're layering another thing, and so forth and so forth. I think with this, there's like a little bit of relief on that burden of deciding on every single detail. So a lot of those details are decided for you by the system, which is sort of a nice, and you can try different things. You can then, slightly change your target, you can slightly change your corpus database, you can slightly change it, and then you're going to have sometimes, or the requirements of the descriptors that you're using, with the rules that you're using, and that way you can manipulate that, but you still have that shape. That shape remains the way that your target has it. And so if you found a shape you like, then the concatenative synthesis can reproduce that shape. And that's kind of a slightly novel element to this whole thing. So it's not just, yes, it also generates new sound permutations. It has this very mosaic kind of a sound quality to it, depending on how big you want your grains to be. But it also has this sort of a structural property, which most of the electronic music tools don't have.
right. Well, I need to try it. I will provide the link maybe in our
Yeah.
when I publish this. Um, I wanted to ask you actually something that I ask myself with these new tools is Mubu, Wakinator, which you just quoted. And basically, I think I have in mind a lot of these, say, Atao Tanaka, maybe you know this, and this guy. And this is what I really think machine learning is good at. Like, say when you have this gesture that you will of which you will reduce the dimensions then to map to a few synthesis parameters. But how do we composers could use all these tools, Wakinator, Mubu, and how to differentiate them, and how could we do stuff with them, we as we are not primarily performers on stage with our 9 instruments, or I don't see you do that so much either. No.
No, but I think that there are different approaches. I think that there are basically two approaches. One of them is to exploit the errors of the system, which is of course something which will work for a certain number of years now, and then like in 15-20 years, I'm now again giving a random number, the AI will get so good that this whole glitching will not anymore be. First of all, it will become like criticizing its glitchiness will become obsolete, and second of all, it will become too good to kind of make a mock of it. I know that a lot of artists like Jennifer Walsh, right, are commenting on certain shortcomings of such system and are playing on this fringe, on this kind of a friction between kind of the system trying to imitate something, right, and at the same time failing to do this properly, or this like very marginal line where you kind of like it's good enough to like fool you for a second, but it's not good enough on a long term. You still see that there are these unexpected things that from a commercial standpoint, like companies want to get rid of, but from an artistic standpoint, that's very interesting to kind of exploit on unpredictable outcomes that come as a sort of a mismatch of this imitation game, right? So that's one very, very fruitful creative aspect, whether you're doing it just from an ideological standpoint, like how do we distinguish fake from real news, right? And you comment on it without actually using AI technology, or if you are using AI technology and harnessing on that. So in my thesis, I'm also describing a piece by Jennifer Walsh called Ultrachunk, where she has in collaboration with Memo Atkin created a software that is able to imitate her sing. So she has been for like approximately a year recording herself like little videos like this one we're just doing, where she would just improvise for a few minutes. And then she sent all of those, recordings to Memo, who was able to kind of make a virtual Jennifer that she is then. So that was like the training set, right? And then her singing live on stage is the actual set that the system is trying to match again. So the system is trying to do exactly what she's doing, but because she's improvising, it can never perfectly follow her. So it becomes a duet, right? Mm-hmm. And she's really nicely playing with that blurring, and you can still see that because the video kind of like jitters weirdly, like, and you can see like she's been purposefully like not having the same background in her. She's dyed her hair, she's cut her hair, then she has a longer hair in some videos, and like the time passes, but the system is looking for little chops through it all, and so do you have these weird changes of her, suddenly changes of her hair, but like it still has a continuous like sound that kind of binds it. And so it's very interesting, this sort of like, you see that it's her, but you also see that it's not her, right? So like that's one possibility of playing with these new tools. It's like exploiting their weaknesses and presenting that.
What was the name of that piece again? You
Ultra chunk.
Yeah.
Yeah, no worries.
So second.
Yeah, and so the second one that I see is the one where you're actually able to do or work on something which would otherwise require humans an extreme effort and time that would not be viable for anything, right? And here is a lot of that, kind of like mosaicing and reshuffling that concatenative synthesis does, but I'm not saying that's the only way, but I'm trying to generalize or abstract that principle, because what it's doing is it's going through a bunch of, and also what my technique that I described earlier would be doing is like you're going through a bunch of either scores or audio, it doesn't really matter, right? And you're looking for bits and details and similarities which intuitively you would find, but like just imagining structuring like some kind of a general form where you're like defined approximately, like you want to go from low to high, and then you want it to go from slow to faster, something like that. Like let's say you have something as simple as that as your model, right? Just imagine how much time you would need to go through a database, and even if you just had 100 examples in your mini database, and like sectioning each segment and saying like, okay, let's see, Beethoven, let's say you have 100 bars of Beethoven as your database, and so for each instance you're going and checking against each instance of Beethoven music to see whether it would fit better or worse. It would take you hours in things for which AI does like this. So any kind of problem like that, where you might be able to generate a new result by something which otherwise would have taken hours for a normal human being, is where I think these tools are going to come extremely handy. And the results are always in a need of that human touch, of that tweaking, of that, like, in the end, even though it's like, okay, AI does a lot of work for you, but it's you who decided it's going to be, it's going to be whoever you want to take an example, Clara Schumann or Beethoven, right? You made that decision, not a computer. You made the decision that it's going to be this and not that piece of music that you're throwing in, or like that it's going to be this group of pieces or that group of pieces. It's you who decided, what the chunks of your things. You're the one who's deciding what is the kind of a model you're trying to match. So there's a lot of, you were talking about keeping the human in the loop. I mean, it is impossible to not keep a human in the loop, and there's always going to be it's this interesting theory of the I forgot the name of the author, but the question of the Chinese box, the idea that a person who's not a native speaker of any language, I mean, Chinese was just taken as an example, is put in a box and has like this dictionary where like he has on the left side of the book the questions and on the right side the answers, and so basically he'll receive in a foreign language a list of with questions, he'll find it in his lexicon and he'll find the answer and give it back. From your subjective perspective as a person who gave a question and got an answer, you're going to think that box is intelligent in the sense that it understands what you asked and thus gives you an answer. But from the perspective of the person inside of that box, and that box is of course a symbol for a computer, the computer or the person in the box does not understand literally what you're asking it. And I think that at this point, like so-called the weak artificial intelligence does not really understand the questions. Like it has the tools to provide you solutions, but it does not understand the solutions it's proposing to you, at least not at this stage. So
optimizing, right?
It's basically optimizing and doing it at an incredible speed, right? And I think that this is another way of looking at it, like using tools that can like boost up your thing, and then you can concentrate of like how you're going to orchestrate it, how you're going to like, and you get these interesting new, results. And I think these kind of tools will be very helpful. That's another approach, and I think that approach is not going to go old as the first one, because like the first one, the sort of like, I mean, it's not necessarily mocking, but it's like exploiting the weakness. Like these systems are getting better and better year after year, so at some point they're going to be next to perfect, right? Or we're assuming they're going to be. So that to thematize that through like some kind of artistic expression is just going to be as old as, like how they, in the early days of electronic music, they were exploiting these very primitive sinusoid sounds that nobody uses today. And when you hear it, you're like, oh yeah, those are the 1950s, and you just know that that's the thing. Like, but then by the 1970s, that was not a fresh thing anymore. I think that this also has the same kind of a fate to it. It's going to run its course at some point, right?
That's interesting. So
one might have
being an AI glitch composer for now that it's still unperfect, right? And I wanted to go back to actually I felt myself when you said about you need data, you need a lot of data, and actually when I used that, it was not long ago, and I finally found that well, I had say 100 fragments. And it wasn't doing anything really interesting. It wasn't finding relationships between those fragments. But when I had 400 or 500, it was, I don't know, suddenly then you can feel that it will find two interesting, they're so similar, and yet they have this difference. And it was, I got to see the point, and I'm just paraphrasing what you said. But postmodernism, I would like to talk a bit about your music now, maybe. First, postmodernism, is it something that you feel close to, or is it not a word that you...
I do feel that, of course, I think we exited postmodernism. I mean, and you can call the new era, what you want. I, in a way, call it like illusionism, in the sense that it is this kind of a selling of an illusion, and it's this. I mean, also with the AI, the illusion that it thinks, right? And I think that for the last 10, 15 years, I view it. Some people call it like. People love to use this pre-post new in the titles of the eras. So some people call it like cyber art, or like post-internet art, or internet art. But there's a moment of like creating this illusion that there's a system that understands it and is able to mimic what you're doing. And I think that there's a lot of postmodernist thought today, but I think that this sort of making this like huge pastiches of like let's say a typical postmodernist piece like Crumb's Black Angels, which is a wonderful piece, right? Which has a little bit of Schubert in it, and it has like those, quotations of, I think it's also Paganini in it, and a lot of very interesting techniques, and then like a little bit extension. The string players are also using some little percussion instruments. Like that would be a lot of like where there are these moods, and there's not a concrete storyline that's being followed, but you're like kind of getting through it. I think that all of that is now getting kind of very condensed, and then what we're trying to do is we're trying to simulate like an organic unity, whereas like everything within is structured from what existed before. And I think this is a very novel thing. I don't see it, I do see it having a lineage from postmodernism, but I think it would be wrong to call this still a postmodernism. I think there's an inherently different type of thinking, and also there's a lot of like when you look at those generations all the way up to the 2000s, the way that we talk to people, I think that people are much more aware of what other people are doing, whereas like still in the 70s, it was, well, it wasn't a task. I mean, you still had to sit on a plane, but just like the cost of the plane was more, the number of planes were less. It was not like you were not popping back and forth to see, and there was no way of like, yeah, there was television, but it was just like, it was like a very mediated approach of what you could see. Now you have like TikTok, Instagram, all of those, like, in a second, like, like I know what's, happening with you on the other side of the continent, more or less, by following your stories and stuff like that. I think we're more aware, and I think this has kind of reduced the stereotyping also of women, different races mutually. I think it's kind of created, and I think we're much more aware of these things now. So it's kind of creating this new grids of things actually fusing in a much different way. We're not like, oh, like, how I read, for example, that Stockhausen went to like India, and then he got inspired by his, he spent there a while, and then inspired by their very particular metric system, and then he used that for a few of his pieces. I think that it's like the access to things is so quicker, so much like you can just like, oh, I don't know that, Google, and it's just like you can much quicker check your facts and use them more concretely for your unique vision and purpose. And I think that's definitely creating certain qualities to the works that have been coming up in the last 10 years or so, that could not be classified, in my opinion, as postmodernism.
Sure. I came up with the name, of course, with this idea of mosaicing, but also with your piece. Like, I really want to draw attention on your late piece, Dark Room. Yeah. So I'll put that link too. Perfect. And which it's amazing, really beautiful. And
thank you.
And you have in the middle of it, around 5 minutes, like something that is not the opposite of what the piece was, but you wouldn't expect just though that EDM,
plain EDM like, quote like that.
Yeah, so that for me is a postmodern act, but maybe not. I don't know. I think of your title of So Come As You Are. You have those things when we're in the world of contemporary music, and I don't know.
Right.
But talk a bit about that piece, because it's so good.
Well, I mean, Dark Room is a very unusual piece. It's I got a commission by No Borders Orchestra to write a piece inspired by Berghain, which is one of the most famous European but also worldwide clubbing venues that occasionally will host their own concerts, mostly EDM, as you said, electronic dance music. And it has had to be sort of inspired either by Berghain, techno, or both. And so what I'm trying to do here is I'm sort of fusing these two worlds, and I'm at the same time using concatenative synthesis and thinking a little bit through the lens of that, where I listen to a lot of techno, also very recent ones. So I listen to, especially sometimes Berghain will come out with certain like their own sessions, like an hour-long session, right? So I picked a few of those, and I was like really looking for interesting, very contrasting, very expressive parts of it. That was forming my database, but then I made the algorithm work such that it would choose very, very tiny snippets, so that, like in terms of like rights of use and all that, it was so, the material was so developed that it didn't really have, there was no way of recognizing the original. And then there was just one piece that I really liked, Plastica Man by DJ Knops is his artistic name, and his real name is Diego Simonetti. And this is also a nice part of our century. I just wrote to this guy over Facebook. I found that we actually have some common friends, and it's like, look, I really love this, and that explosion at the beginning, and that part that you see around minute 5, right? I said, like, I really want just to have these few moments where I kind of make it naked and just give it as is, right? So that connection that I'm simulating all the time also has a moment where it kind of opens itself out, and it's not anymore this mashup, but it like actually becomes EDM, right? And so he agreed, and for me to use that snippet of 10 seconds free of charge, and it comes on 3 spaces. Actually, it comes at the very opening, it comes at minute 5, and there's like, it's also in the climax moment, but it's so overlayered with other instruments playing that it maybe is most clear at the moment 5 where there's solo electronics. Interestingly, that piece has also been inspired by Slavoj Žižek in a way, who's like this famous Slovenian philosopher, and notably the book Parallax View, and I'm generally very interested in these things where you're like now you're not okay. Well, now the video is hiding, but like from this perspective, you're not really seeing my right hand, and then I turn to this perspective, and now you don't really see my left hand. And so he's talking a lot about parallax and about like framing things in a certain way, and then. And he always has these funny anecdotes where he says that there was this, and I'm completely telling the story wrong. I don't remember if it was Chile or Argentina, but one of these countries that had like a lot of protests against their prime minister, or like a big political figure like that, and so they even made masks of him to mock him, and they were protesting. So there was this one moment where they were his associates were afraid that the mob might get into their parliament or whatever it was. So in order to evacuate him, what they did is they put the mask of him on him so that people would not recognize him by him wearing his own mask. And that is so brilliant. I just find these, these things so interesting. And I was like trying to work a lot with that, whereas the whole electronics is the compressed version of the entire piece, but it comes in the middle of it, and then the essence of it is nothing. He says the essence of parallax is sort of not, that void between what is real and what is fake, in a sense, or what is and so this is what was the thing where the heart of the piece actually has gaps. So it means that like the whole piece is like constructed as this 2 instrumental sections that have a gap in the middle. Now that gap is filled with electronics that compress, mimics each section of the piece, but then in the heart of it has gaps, and here I put like, there are these few glitches with some kind of like size and sounds that were taken from, like they're alluding to sex, because of course dark rooms are like the dark places in the, the club venues, notably, in gay community where people can, kind of go and release their tension, and out of the sight of a public eye, but still kind of publicly. So it's weird. But for me, there was like these ideas or intertwined, and so the middle of it is actually playing with the aspect of void, where these breaks and pauses kind of like jittering that material, right? So I don't know. That was a kind of a concept of the whole piece. I don't know. That tells you enough.
It's great. Well, I don't know. I think you should wrap up and find I just wanted to draw attention on a HDS Recording Plus School, which seems to be your editor or sort of school follower, but Croatian version.
Yeah, exactly. Well, H stands for Hrvatska, which means Croatia in Croatian. So that's why it doesn't start with a C, right? So it's a Croatian Society of Composers, and they have their own little score following with which they're trying to give more awareness to Croatian music. You can definitely check it out, and I'm very grateful to Vanja Lisjak who made the whole thing. I don't think it's really there to compete with other score following services. I think that it was just I have a relationship with them, and I knew that they do a good job for it, and they do a little bit of advertising. Who else does it? Like Babel scores? Who's normally the one doing?
I think they're on their way to do it. They will soon have those videos. Like, obviously, it's great. Like to
I
be
think it's very
visible on.
practical. I mean,
Yeah.
this is a project for which that is not commercial in the sense that that pop music is. So I don't know. I think that is, however, a big problem. I did read recently a very good article on how like over times like the amount of money that gets back into the artist's pockets, and then this kind of like assumption, like everybody, when you say, you know, artists, most people around the world will think Beyonce, you know. And not that I want to play down her artistry or anything, but like one has to remember that there's a lot of, you know, artists that are, well, maybe not necessarily starving, but like you and me, you know, like who are fighting it very hard to keep their music alive. I mean, we're now kind of now used to this internet having everything for free, but it's interesting to see how most other services have managed to better, and I think the maybe there's some mistake on our part as musicians for having hoped that, you know, through a bigger exposure over internet, we're just giving all of our content for free. Maybe that's, I don't know, I'm not saying it is, I'm just posing a question, right? Like most other people, if you're selling a product, yeah, you're gonna give a snippet, you're gonna give a teaser, you're gonna give something, but you're never gonna give your entire product for free, right? And I think it started from the music community, and now everybody else is just assuming that, you know, and also including me. I mean, I'm also then using those services when I'm approaching other people's work, right? So I'm also using YouTube to listen to other people and other online services for free, because it's there. But like if it was mandatory to, you know, to pay something, then I would definitely pay something. Back in the days, my father was super proud, and back in Yugoslavia, it was super hard to get some LCs, you know, and LP records, and so he bought each and every one of them. We have a huge collection of his back home. He has he bought each and every one of those, and he was super proud. You know, he would travel to England and he would buy some Beatles and I don't know what, and he would travel to United States, he would buy some I don't know, Jimi Hendrix and and you know, that's how people used to collect and listen. And then you used to go to the friend because you knew, oh, he had Led Zeppelin but you don't, you know, and stuff. And today it's all like kind of available for free, and I'm wondering whether we shouldn't be thinking of finding a better system where there's a little bit more money that remains in our pocket, so that we can, you know, I don't know if these score followings, I think they're great ideas as such, that people can also view the scores and listen to the music, but I'm just posing out a question, like, is there another way that we could be using these services?
Sure, it's a difficult topic. Well,
Yeah.
there's something that we forgot to mention, as we were saying earlier. You know, we're publishing this for l'éducation musicale, so students, and if you could tell them what is a PhD at Stanford in composition. I know, of course, we're friends, so you speak perfect French. Perhaps you could say it in French. I don't know if that makes sense or not. Well, let's keep it in English. Up
Yeah,
to
I
you.
mean,
But how is the curriculum? How does it work? And what are they expecting? Or
so
if
Stanford
that's
is
not too
definitely
academic for you?
absolutely not. Stanford is, first of all, an amazing university that's, you know, in the past 10 years been one of the top 3 to 5, always next to like Harvard, Oxford, or MIT, and certainly the music department is a part of that. The PhD here is actually called DMA, which stands for Doctoral for Musical Arts, And the reason why it's not a PhD is because PhD, by definition, involves writing a very large thesis, more academic and more scientific. So DMA is more a creative research, and the goal of the whole thing is to write a dissertation piece, which is a piece of music. So the program is 5 years long. Currently, as I said, Brian Ferneyhough is... I'm his last advisee, and he's not going to be teaching anymore, unfortunately. He's fully retiring, but there's Patricia Alessandrini, who's amazing, Jonathan Berger, Mark Applebaum, and Yara Kapuscinski. Those are the four main composition faculty currently here. And there's an amazing worldwide renowned institute, Karma, that was founded back in the, I think, late 70s by John Chowning.
Chowning.
Yeah. And so the institute exists and thrives even now, and is an amazing, huge building just dedicated for the research of electronic music. So there's also an actual PhD in computer music, more on the technological side. So there actually, our department offers 3 programs: the DMA in composition, the PhD in musicology and ethnomusicology and all of those subjects, and then a PhD in music computing at Karma. So those are the only 3 musical doctorates that you can get from Stanford. And it's great. It has a lot of kind of a research, notably in digital signal processing. We have a neuro lab. We have, like, it's absolutely fantastic to be able to access and use that facility. So that's a plus. And then the program itself, as I said, 5 years. The first year is usually charged with a lot of courses you have to take. It's kind of like compressed masters, so to say. The second and third year, you teach yourself. You also take a few courses, but you are an assistant to a professor. And then once you pass that, you go into the sort of candidacy, and there you're in your last 2 years, which is where I'm now at. Is in your 4th year, you write a special area examination, which is a sort of a compressed version, or a slightly less ambitious doctoral thesis on a topic of your interest that kind of is tangential to your music but doesn't directly talk about your music. And then the last year you have to write your final dissertation piece, and you have a defense by presenting that piece and usually writing a short summary of what this piece is about. So yeah, it's a very nice program. Now we're in the time of COVID, so it's a little bit bizarre having all of those classes strictly over Zoom like this. But otherwise, it's a really rich community, and I would definitely advise your students, if they're interested, to apply and maybe first contact some of the teachers. They're very open. They'll definitely respond to your emails if you have any questions. It's always good to make yourself known before you're applying, and of course they keep the competition professional, but it doesn't hurt to know what the university is about, what you're about, and how in your cover letter bring that up, rather than you talk about one thing and the university expecting another thing. And then sometimes a lot of people are good people, but they don't manage to show that they belong there when they're applying, and then they don't get selected even if they're great as composers, right?
Well, I don't think they need any advertisement from me, but I still want to say that I've had a lot of time this year, so I could attend online the MOOCs. There are huge courses online by Matt Wright. You have like the best Max class ever.
Yeah.
Matt Wright is the inventor of OSC, and also Perry Cook for more DSP side of things. Chuck and.
Yes. And then, there's Gavang, who's been there for a while, and he's got this new book that talks a lot about the design of interfaces, and he's teaching a lot of that, and how you can how you can create different interactive design for cell phones, for um, any kind of device, and how you can like expand on instruments. He's really also one of the amazing people that we have at Karma teaching. So
Nice. I suppose you originally those were very separate domains, but don't you think we have to talk to each other little by little? Like,
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. No, I'd be happy to. I mean, um, I actually through Stanford realized how important it is to publish stuff and to keep also keep in the loop people that are doing similar stuff on the other side of the world, and because it's just mutually inspirational. It makes you not feel alone, and it also cross validates it. It's you then you raise awareness in your community about somebody who's from outside of that community, and I think that's the most valuable thing.
well, thank you, Davor. I don't want to take much
No,
more of your time.
no, it's perfect. Thank you for your time, and I've enjoyed this conversation.
And well, just listen to Davor's music, and your thesis is going to be available soon, probably. And
Yes,
that's it for now.
exactly. Thank you so much, Jonathan.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye bye.